The night was eerily silent, yet Daniel's heart pounded like a drum. He had always believed that the world was fair, that if he worked hard, stayed honest, and treated others with kindness, life would reward him. But tonight, standing in the dimly lit parking lot of his workplace, he realized how dangerously naive he had been. Everything had been normal just a few days ago. His job at the corporate firm was going well. His performance was above average, and his boss had hinted at an upcoming promotion. He had no enemies, or so he thought. But in reality, 3 people had already set a plan in motion, a plan so meticulously designed that by the time he noticed, it would be too late. The first sign, a subtle shift in behavior. It started subtly, almost unnoticeably. His colleagues, whom he had shared lunch breaks and inside jokes with, began treating him differently. Their words carried an undertone of suspicion. His emails were suddenly overlooked, and meetings where his presence was once crucial were held without him. A week ago, he had been a rising star. Now, he was an outsider, a suspect in a crime he hadn't even realized was unfolding. The first radar warning came from an unexpected source, an intern named Liam, who had always admired Daniel. One afternoon, Liam approached him nervously in the break room. "Daniel, I overheard something. I think—" He hesitated, lowering his voice. "I think someone is trying to frame you." Daniel laughed. "Frame me? For what?" Liam looked uneasy. "I don't know, but I heard them say your name. They were talking about evidence, something being mixed into—" He stopped abruptly as another employee walked in. His face went pale, and he quickly excused himself. Something being mixed into what? Daniel shrugged it off. Maybe Liam had misunderstood. After all, this was just an office job. He wasn't involved in anything criminal. But that night, as he lay in bed, the seed of doubt took root. The trap begins to unfold. The next day, things escalated. His access to certain files was restricted without explanation. HR called him in, subtly questioning his recent activities. Then at lunch, he noticed 3 of his colleagues huddled together, 2 men and a woman. They weren't whispering, but their voices were low, and every now and then, one of them glanced in his direction. That's when he felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being hunted. It wasn't paranoia. Something was happening, and it became terrifyingly clear that he was the target. By evening, Daniel's world had tilted dangerously on its axis. A major financial discrepancy was discovered in the company's records, and his name was suddenly attached to it. It was absurd. He had never even handled those accounts. But the evidence was piling up at an alarming rate. Emails he never wrote. Transactions he never approved. A paper trail leading straight to him. And then the final blow. One of the 3 conspirators, his co-worker Richard, approached him with a chilling smirk. "Tough luck, Daniel. But hey, sometimes you just have to be careful who you trust." That's when he knew the trap had been set, and he had already stepped into it. Fighting back, the power of awareness. Most people don't see betrayal coming until it's too late. It starts subtly, a whisper here, a missing document there. And then, when the trap finally snaps shut, they wonder how it happened. But here's the truth. The signs are always there. You just have to learn how to see them. Daniel had spent his life believing that being good was enough to protect him. But now, he was learning the hard way that sometimes people will try to poison your future, whether through lies, deceit, or calculated sabotage. But here's the thing about poison. It only works if you consume it. So, what do you do when you realize someone is trying to destroy you? You watch, you listen, and you prepare. Daniel wasn't going down without a fight, and neither should you. Daniel knew he was running out of time. The walls were closing in, and the evidence against him was mounting. If he didn't act fast, his career, no, his entire future, would be ruined. But fear wouldn't save him. Panic wouldn't protect him. If he wanted to survive this, he had to think like them. Step 1, identifying the players. The first thing he needed to do was confirm who was behind this. He already had a strong suspicion. Richard was too smug to be innocent. But who were the other 2? He started observing. He paid attention to conversations, body language, and sudden changes in behavior. Then he saw it, outside the office, in the parking lot. Richard was speaking with Mark, the company's finance officer, and standing next to them, nodding along, was Julia, the HR representative who had subtly questioned him earlier. 3 people, 3 snakes. They had carefully orchestrated everything. Richard likely planted the idea, Mark manipulated the financial records, and Julia ensured HR was on board. It was a perfect setup. But now that Daniel knew, he had a fighting chance. Step 2, finding the weak link. No conspiracy is airtight. There's always a weak link, and Daniel was determined to find it. Between the 3, Julia seemed the most hesitant. She wasn't as smug as Richard or as confident as Mark. He needed to get inside her head to shake her belief in their plan. The next morning, he approached her casually in the hallway. "I had an interesting conversation with someone last night," he said, watching her closely. "Turns out I wasn't the only one noticing strange things in the company's accounts." Julia stiffened. "What do you mean?" He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "You know what I mean." She faltered, a small crack in her composure. That was it, the weak spot. Now, he just needed to push harder. Step 3, gathering evidence. If they had created a false paper trail, Daniel needed to create a real one. He stayed late that night, going through every document, every email, every log he could access. Then he found something interesting. A transaction, one that supposedly had his approval, had a slight discrepancy in the timestamp. The approval email was sent at 2:17 a.m., but Daniel was home asleep at that time, and he had security camera footage from his apartment complex to prove it. Boom, a crack in their plan. Step 4, striking back. The next morning, he made his move. He walked into HR's office, but this time, he controlled the narrative. He presented the footage, pointed out the timestamp error, and subtly mentioned that he had spoken to a legal consultant about corporate fraud cases. That was enough. Julia panicked. She tried to deny involvement, but the fear in her eyes told Daniel everything. She would crack under pressure. And she did. Within hours, HR launched a deeper investigation. Julia confessed her involvement, trying to save herself. The moment she turned against them, Richard and Mark's carefully constructed trap collapsed. By the end of the week, they were fired. Investigations were opened. And Daniel, he was cleared of all accusations. The lesson: protect your future before they poison it. Daniel learned the hard way that not everyone around you has good intentions. Some people will smile to your face while sharpening the knife behind your back. But here's what you need to remember. Traps only work if you walk into them blindly. Always be aware. Watch for signs. Trust but verify. And most importantly, never let someone else write the ending to your story. Because when you see the trap before it closes, you can do something even more powerful. You can turn it against them